All right. Thank you so much, and welcome again to Tessa.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. This is going to be a training tonight on teaching climate change with our emotions, and I will explain what that means. We'll go through a lot of sort of the etiology around climate change emotionally and how it's impacted us. I really just want to say I appreciate all of you as teachers, just period, but in this moment especially, and I hope you're all getting the care and the love you need and navigating this with as much grace as you possibly can. So a little bit about me. My name is Tessa Anttila. Here's one of my favorite cedar trees along the North Shore. I would consider myself a climate change therapist. Some people call that ecopsychologist. Ecopsychology is the synergy between humans and nature, and understanding and being curious about how the disconnection between humans and nature has caused mental illness, essentially. And I think what brought me to this work that feels important is much of my young adolescence and young adulthood, I had just paralyzing climate dread. And I really had no one to talk about it. And so when I would find someone that had empathy or compassion or could tolerate the emotional, overwhelming feelings of it, it really made a difference. And so I wanted to be that for other people. And coincidentally, I found it quite freeing. You know, our instincts say you have all this dread, just don't think about it, push it away, move away from it. It's actually quite the opposite. Being free from a lot of this dread and primal anguish really relies on being able to make a safe container to feel it. So we're going to talk about that tonight. We have 4 objectives for the training. We're going to talk about the legacy of separation, that sort of humans coming into civilization and trying to, evolve has caused us. We're going to look at our emotions from an evolutionary standpoint. Really, they have evolved to be the best internal navigational system we've got, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Overcoming climate change is really overcoming disconnection. I'm sure as teachers, with the impacts of social media and polarization, you're noticing just like how lonely people are feeling. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And a little bit, today is kind of a short training. So it's important to kind of steep ourselves in the story of this because it really helps identifying it and making a different choice from it. Ourselves and with others, with the folks we're teaching and just in our own lives. So we're going to talk a little bit about what does it mean to teach climate change from our emotions. I want to start with this quote from Desmond Tutu, former Archbishop of Cape Town. 25 years ago, we could be excused for not knowing much or doing much about climate change. Today, we have no excuse. The reason I'm starting with this quote is because we're looking here at a picture of LA on fire. And why is it that we keep running up against...
Tessa, I'm sorry to interrupt you because I shared my slides. We need to re-share your slides. I'm so sorry. I thought you were just doing an introduction before you did them.
Oh, no problem. No problem. What do you need from me?
If you just want to do the same share button that we did before.
It's not sharing. Oh gosh, I'm sorry, buddy.
So sorry about that.
No problem. So I'm just sharing my screen, right?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, thanks for catching that.
Thank you all for being patient with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going right in. It's working on it here.
Yeah. And if it doesn't end up doing that, I think I have a set of your slides as well.
I'm sure it'll be fine. This happened when we got on here the first time. Okay, optimize for video. Okay. Is that working?
I'm seeing.
Here.
There we go. It is.
Excellent.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks everyone for telling us. Okay. So why is it that we can't get past this lip we keep finding ourselves on, right? I guess I would argue that a part of what keeps us stuck from moving past climate change to climate change adaptation is sort of the way we've learned to shut down emotionally around these big feelings. And that has kind of led us into the Anthropocene, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It is a time of separation, but really what that means is it's a geological epoch that is distinguished by the impact, the irreversible impact humans are having on planet Earth. And this is a really great little podcast that, oh gosh, the name of it is in my notes. I can't remember, but I will find it if you want it later. But this is a really great little video, a really great tool to use with your students about Anthropocene.
Anthropocentrism is basically the notion of human supremacy over all living things. It can drive our sense of entitlement to see nature as a resource, and it's why we presume to control the world, trying to bend it to our every will and convenience.
In a dominant worldview, we see humans as being fundamentally separate from nature. We just have in our language, we say, going out into nature.
Get out into nature.
In the natural world.
What happens when you go into the wild?
To the wild!
Or we talk about human versus nature.
It's man against nature.
Man versus nature.
Man versus wild.
Nature is this kind of thing that's out there with trees and skies, and even the people who care about saving ecological richness are called environmentalists. Somehow it's the environment that they're caring about, not the actual stuff that happens in the environment. But here's what's interesting. In indigenous cultures everywhere, basically, from Hawaii to Native America to Aboriginal Australia to Aboriginal communities in India, in each of these places, there was a certain way of relating to the rest of nature, not seeing it as a resource to exploit, but seeing it as a living, sacred and set of entities.
As indigenous people, we believe the land is alive and it holds memory, and that we have to respect that it's a living system. So one of the reasons why we're in this predicament is because this is a colonial paradigm of turning our beautiful country, living waters and nature into a resource. So when you're talking to indigenous people, one of the things we want to be clear about is that we're not in any post-colonial framework. Colonialism is continuing. It's an extremely warlike, invasive, destructive way to see and be in the world, where everything is commodified. And so what I see in terms of what's happening around the planet is that there's a very big clash of values. People who see the world and feel the world and build a relationship, and then those that look at the world in terms of seeing these things in nature as a resource to be extracted, to be exploited, to be sold on the open market for the top price.
So that's the system that we're trying to understand and rebuild and develop a different relationship to. So after generations of this system built on the idea that humans are separate from nature, we've learned to ignore our emotions. And because of this, we're in trouble. So I want to talk a little bit about what happens when we ignore our emotions. Again, down to the very cellular level of our bodies. Susan Raffo, who is a activist in the city and wrote a book, Liberated to the Bone, has a series of essays essentially about how do we find our way back to this liberated place emotionally. And cell bodies do two things. They hold their breath and they close down and protect, and they open and they heal, they breathe and they grow. And we learned that from plants in our evolutionary history. So emotions are really evolved from life doing life very, very well and effectively. And what happens when we ignore those emotions is over time, our responses to these signals fade and we lose our capacity to protect ourselves, our communities, and our planet. We grow this apathetic, sort of numb, paralyzing response when we should be really activated and really clear and planful about what we're doing. Because we want to. I know a lot of people on this planet want that change theoretically. And when you try to fight your internal emotional compass, you're left with a system that essentially turns in on itself. You end up with little to no emotional tolerability for the day-to-day moments of discomfort and uncertainty, not to mention the moments of conflict and crisis like we're in right now. The end result is increases in burnout, conflict at work, community, political polarization, violence, homelessness, loneliness, and mental illness. I mean, you could argue that this separation, not only, we are nature, right? So it's not as distinct as from nature, but from the relationship that evolutionarily we are meant to have as life on Earth, is the cause for all of it. And what that leaves us with when we have this sort of somatic shutdown and we're not allowing our primal emotions to come is you're left with sort of a suite of experiences that include denial, avoidance, confusion, and control. And, I do a lot of trainings with environmentalists. I do a lot of trainings with therapists, and both it's interesting because therapists, it's our job to feel and help other people feel. Environmentalists, it's their job to really figure out climate change and try to adapt. And both of these groups of people often say, I am so avoidant about feeling. I will stay in my theoretical brain, I will stay in the intellectual part, and I'll do, but I don't know that I've even felt the grief that I need to feel. So it's in all of us. Y'all are teachers. I don't know how many of you, what age groups you're working with, but I'm sure you're seeing the negative impacts of social media. I know there are some benefits to it, but social media just really kind of clicks in with our already apathetic culture and that avoidance that's built into us emotionally. It's, slow, meaningful, healing sort of advertising or content doesn't really get the same dopamine kick that the crude, the fast, the violence does. So our kids are really inundated with it. We are too. So denial, avoidance, confusion, and control. This is our work. Mary Pfeiffer, a clinical psychologist who wrote a book called The Green Boat, explains that we've been taught to put our energy into denial. So we can't actually admit to ourselves when we need to repair and reorient. This has made us so unskillful and avoidant emotionally and has disconnected us from life around us. We once relied on our tight communities to hold us accountable, and we're just not there anymore. We don't have those same connections. And this has brought us into what we're calling the era of loneliness. We'll talk a little bit more about what this means, but it's really the cost of generations of separation from culture, from land, from, whether you are identifying as a white person or an indigenous person, we all are indigenous to somewhere, as Robin Wall Kimmerer says. We all have these roots in a land-based system and really connected and making meaning out of the world around us. So in May of 2023, the Surgeon General released an advisory committee on the growing epidemic of loneliness. And this is what they found. Loneliness and social isolation are widespread. They affect everyone across various age groups, gender, sex, socioeconomic backgrounds. They have significant implications on our mental and our physical health. Loneliness is linked to an increase of mental health conditions, cardiovascular disease, and higher mortality rate. Someone said it's compared to smoking 10 cigarettes a day. It's wild, isn't it, to think about? Young people, particularly adolescents, are increasingly affected by loneliness. And the research shows this is sort of Kids are younger and younger when they're starting to be affected by this, and younger as they're on social media, and in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. The advisory emphasizes the importance of community-level interventions and supportive policies to foster social connections, like enhancing public spaces and encouraging community engagement. It calls for a comprehensive approach across all, public health, all sectors of life to address. It is unprecedented and having historic impacts on our lives. So we're going to spend a couple slides digging into this a little bit more. And then we're going to have a little bit of a check-in. So the reality we currently live in, I'm going to throw out some statistics. I'm going to try not to go too fast because these are people's lives. These are societies of animals and really lovely land that is being impacted by this. So 2.33 billion people globally face moderate or severe food insecurity, and 8 million of these people experience severe food insecurity, not eating for a full day or more at times. 33% of all food in the US, this is 78 million tons, is thrown away. That's almost 145 million meals due to people just not paying for it, so they throw it away. Over 770,000 people were homeless in the US in a single night in 2024. And I know some people can read these statistics a little differently, and there's some question about how exactly accurate this number is, but it is an 18% increase from 2023. We are not in a great place as a society. Worldwide, around 150 million people are homeless, despite there being almost 600,000 homeless people in the US. There's 16 million vacant homes. There's also a dangerous decline in the planet's health caused by human activity. So we're using 1.6 Earths in every calendar year. So what that means is in a calendar year, so that one, we're going 0.6 over the amount that our Earth can regenerate before we use that amount the next year. 1 million of the world's estimated 8 million species of plants, that's over 10%, and animals are threatened with extinction. 75% of the Earth's land surface has been significantly altered by human actions. 85% of wetlands. Wetlands are one of my favorite biomes. They're like the lungs of the Earth. They are the boundaries, the protective barriers that protect other more vulnerable ecosystems. 66% of ocean areas impacted by human activities, including from fisheries and pollution. Close to 90% of the world's marine fish stocks are fully exploited, overexploited, or depleted. Our global food system is the primary driver of biodiversity loss, with agriculture alone being the identified threat of 24,000 to 28,000 species that are at risk of extinction. Agricultural expansion is said to account for 70% of the projected loss of terrestrial biodiversity. That means our soil is desertifying, turning into desert. All of the nutrients, all of the important microbes that we then eat and they keep us healthy, 70% is projected to be lost. I can't remember the year that the projection is, but hard stuff to chew on a Wednesday afternoon, right? After a full day of work. Climate change and mental health. 55% of people are anxious about the impact of climate change on their mental health. 1 in 5 US adults already experiences mental illness each year, so over double, right, of that number. The impacts of a changing climate on mental health stem from acute events and longer term change. And adolescents are disproportionately impacted by climate change. They're also disproportionately impacted by loneliness. So a quarter to a half of these people who get exposed to an extreme weather disaster are at risk of adverse mental health effects like anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and suicide. Okay, I just want everybody to take a moment. take a full breath. Feel the seat under you. Take a moment and smell the air in the room you're in. Notice what your body is telling you about hearing all of these really dire statistics. Notice what your body is trying to feel. It might be exhaustion, avoidance, anger. You might be annoyed. Why am I having to think about this right now? I've got enough going on. I'm a teacher, for God's sake. Grief, pain, sorrow, hopefulness, powerlessness. Just sit with it for a moment and just say, hello. Here we are. What are you here to show me? Primarily, those emotions that you're sitting with are here to show you they need your care. They need your attention. You know, depending on how many of us there are here right now, we're going to have a very diverse list of responses to this, and none of them are wrong. And we're going to have a very diverse moment with these emotions. And then a question of, where do we go from here? What is our work? What do we do with this emotion? How do we take care of this emotion in ourselves and mirror that for the people that we work with, the people that we teach? It often gets overlooked as not productive enough or not important enough. I don't know. I'm starting to feel like it might be one of the most important things we can do in this moment. Now, why don't you take another full breath? Thank yourself for being here. Thank yourself for feeling some hard emotions with me. And when you're ready, I want to hear if anybody has some questions so far. If not, that's fine. We'll keep trucking through. But I'd love to take a minute for any questions. So if something comes up, maybe write it in the chat box and we'll come back to it at the end, or if it feels pertinent to what we're talking about, Claire, feel free to let me know. Okay, all right. Okay, climate change adaptation is really overcoming disconnection. We're supposed to be covered in dirt, just covered in it, surrounded by communities of care, growing our own food in our own local environments. That's not exactly how things are. So emotional agility is sort of, I love to use this metaphor in therapy. It's like grief, pain, all of that isn't a problem. It's a part of life. And it becomes the dirt, the compost that we grow new things out of. Emotional agility allows us to tolerate conflict in such a way that we end up with deeper connections and deeper trust on the other end of it, not fractured relationships. And that's sort of where we're finding ourselves. A lot of folks are like we have a fight and it's over, or we don't know how to find that reconnection again. And it comes back to our emotions, which have evolved over millions of years to be just what we need them to be. Like I said, they're our internal relational navigational system. When we live in alignment with them, they're not only wonderful for survival, but they're brilliant for resolving distance in relationships and conflict with others. They provide depth, creativity. They're really satisfying. Even when, you know that feeling of like this was so painful and so hard, and we did it, and we're still in one piece. That feels really good. It's like that satisfaction that comes when you've had a really hard conversation with someone you really care about. And, you know, maybe it didn't go perfectly, but you feel like you understand yourself. Sometimes it's just that you understand yourself better. Sometimes that other person isn't capable of being there with you. You don't always get a resolution in a conflict with someone because you can't control the other person, but you can make sure you're getting a resolution inside of yourself. And that requires access to our emotions. Oops. I just love this picture. Like, just take a moment and breathe in that green. Like, it's such an emotional picture. Like, when we are connected to our senses and to our emotions, there's just such a stability and a rootedness there. Humans and emotions. So the first thing to know about emotions is they are never wrong, and they come in all shapes and sizes. Although they are never wrong, sometimes they need interpretation, and they need a lot of practice, especially if we were raised to really feel like emotions are weakness, they're uncivilized, whatever we've been told, either directly or indirectly. When we practice, we grow tolerance, and we receive mirroring on how to navigate through them. They also come in packages with other emotions. It's rare that an emotion comes by itself. And it can be a very overwhelming sensation to figure out. They're distinct and diverse to who we are. They are not universal. They're a compass for navigating relationships and life in general, but mainly they help us resolve conflict, internal conflict, conflict with other people. They give us meaning and depth and richness. They come with embedded beliefs from our culture and our family. Some of them are helpful. Right now, honestly, a lot of them are not. Ignoring them is really bad for us and really bad for our communities. So, teaching climate change from our emotions. What does that look like? I'd like to take a moment before we go into some of the ways we can look at that and hear from y'all. How do you connect with this statement? What does teaching climate change mean to you? Like, what does connecting emotionally around this? When I say that, where do you go? Anybody would like to share? This could also include I shut down, or I feel really numb all of a sudden, or, you know, I love to talk about the beautiful things that we're finding in climate adaptation. I love to be the person that can hear a child sit with a child's grief and not run away from it. Anybody have anything to share?
I can read from the chat if people want to respond there too. And we have one that says experiencing awe in nature.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else?
Another one from the chat is helping kids find connection with a place so that they can be more easily moved to action when they detect something is wrong with their special place.
Absolutely. There's a term for that. We'll get to some language around this in a minute. Okay, I'm going to move on. Well, I have a hunch why maybe there's not more people sharing, and this happens often in a training that has to do with emotions and climate change. A lot of people will say, I'm not an ecologist. I'm not an environmentalist. I'm a teacher or a therapist. Like, who am I to speak on this topic? I think that's such a normal reaction. And I'm not exactly sure what that's about, but I think it's just how overwhelming, like, what other moment have we shared as humans on this earth in this moment that is so big and so overwhelming. I think it just really is hard to talk about. But you don't need to be an ecologist to be a climate change teacher. I didn't go to school to be a climate change therapist. I went to school to be a therapist, and in fact, learned absolutely nothing about climate change. So willingness is key. You just have to be willing. Connection is the goal among all else, right? What we're seeing this theme for today is when we don't feel connected, like that person said, if someone feels connected to a piece of land or another person or a community or a biome, they're gonna respond differently if it's not doing all right. Using your emotions to help your students connect with their own. This is a conversation that therapists have a lot. Like, I don't know how to sit with my own climate grief, so I avoid sitting with others. And this doesn't mean, you have to spend years and years grieving. I think we try to find a way to take a little bit of that steam off the pot, a little bit of that tension out of our body when needed. But often it's just the willingness to just feel that sadness. You see a news article, you hear statistics, and instead of being like, how do you kind of slow down in your body and say, oh, there that is. Yeah. The more you can do it, the more you'll be able to tolerate other people doing it. Celebrate discomfort, conflict, awkwardness. Oh my gosh, this work is so uncomfortable. I mean, I remember, I've been practicing for about 20 years, but really focusing on climate change probably the last 12 to 15 years. And I remember the first time I got really stumped in a session with someone, they were like, but what if we all die? And I was like, what? And they just kind of kept saying it and kept bringing me back to it. And we just had this really tender, painful moment together, but it was incredibly connective. And, we both kind of landed on, okay, to some extent, yes, this is a bigger, larger issue, and extinction is something that is really scary, and we don't necessarily know how to hold emotionally very well, but we all are mortal. We're all going to die. And there is a way you can sort of sit with that fear, that primal fear, and just say, we're going to do the best we can. And if we don't make it, we're going to, go out holding each other, go out caring for whatever bits of nature there's left to care for. And it was actually one of the most powerful moments I think I've had to date around climate grief. It was a really beautiful connective experience. And actually, this person has gone on to do incredible things in the world of climate change. And a lot of their dread has gone down. Name loneliness as a societal problem, not a them problem. I facilitate groups on community and connection, essentially really around the era of loneliness. One of my favorite things to tell a group of new people is you are not single-handedly at fault because you're lonely. Because it's like that story we're told, right? You get a job, you buy a house, you do these things, and you should be nothing but happy. You should be comfortable. Nothing should go wrong. You should get to this place where you've arrived. And it's not exactly how life works. It's a little more complicated emotionally. So people end up feeling like failures or feeling a lot of shame because they feel lonely. Help your students learn how to use fear and panic and despair and hope as effective tools. I will come back to both of these. They're very, very important. Climate change language. We're about to go through some language. There's a couple of terms that are just my favorite. And I'll tell you a little bit more about those in a moment. And bring nature into your classroom. I think the first person that made a comment was speaking to that in some way. Like, what does it mean to connect with nature, to talk about nature, to have lesson plans around relating to nature? And then one of the most important practices is to learn to dream. And we'll sit with this a little bit too, because we are really bad at it. Another thing I do in a lot of trainings is, ask, what is your dream? Right now, Minneapolis, St. Paul, things like we've adapted and had some sort of a resolution around climate change. What does it look like? And people are like, there's something, I'll come back to this. I want to stay focused. So loneliness is a societal problem, not a personal one. Really just let that in whatever way you need right now. And language connects us. Ecopsychology, I explained. We went over the Anthropocene. Biophilia is a fun one. The innate human tendency to connect with nature and with all other forms of life in a loving way, like in a relationship way. Like the indigenous woman on the video said, like it's a relationship, and it's really these clashes of values and ways of looking at the world that are really causing us a lot of harm. Ecocide is an interesting one. The devastation and destruction of the environment to the detriment of life, but no legal definition between states has yet been agreed. This project promotes the discussion towards the criminalization of ecocide. I'm really excited to see where this goes over the next few years legally. If you're curious about like legal aspects related to climate change, ecocide would be a fun one to research. It would be a fun one to research with your students. Solastalgia. This is by far my favorite one. I love naming this in people. It really, you could see the synapses fire when you do. A form of depression, distress, or homesickness caused by environmental change, such as from climate change, human-caused disasters, extreme weather conditions, war and unrest, or other negative or upsetting alterations to one surrounding our home. I will give you all an example you will fully get. So we're Minnesotans, right? I don't know if other people are coming from other places, but we used to have winters. So a lot of people will come in and talk about this weird sensation that is both like guilt, like a guilty pleasure, because we're used to like snow and working really hard and really extreme cold in the winter, but also this deep kind of heart sickness, this missing, this weird kind of vacillating between these two feelings of like, oh my God, this is so nice and this feels really terrible. That is solastalgia. That's a really, really easy one for us to name in Minnesota. Primal panic, the instinctual built-in fear that is as old as life on Earth. Remember, we inherited it from plants, and is supposed to lead us to protective action, but due to apathy, denial, and coercion from profit-based systems, we're getting stuck. Pre-traumatic stress is a new one. The DSM, the diagnostic manual that therapists and psychologists work with, don't consider this an actual DSM diagnosis yet, but it looks very much like PTSD, but it's the preemptive traumatic stress. A lot of young people are sitting with this, like, what is going to happen to our home? What is going to happen to the environment? Are we going to survive? It's a very useful thing to say, hey, I think your body's really responding as if there is a lot of trauma. And yeah, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but also, maybe some good will come out of this too, Planetary anguish is the feeling of incredible grief, pain, despair, and powerlessness that comes from our ecosystems collapsing or genocidal events at the hands of human-led ecological destruction. Some of these are really heavy. Some of these are sweet. Regardless, language is power, right? So as you're noticing maybe some of these things in yourself, first, name them. Oh, there's that solastalgia. Or, there's that primal panic or that anguish. Let me just sit with it for a second. I included a website on here that I think is so much fun and is so much fun for kids. It's the Bureau of Linguistic Reality. It is an art project by a couple of folks. If any of you have heard the term gwilt, It is a project of naming new, like solastalgia, naming new sort of phenomenon or feelings related to climate change. So guilt is the guilt that comes from neglecting your houseplants to the point where they wilt and possibly die. Right? Everybody knows that feeling. Unless you don't have plants, and then you don't. But there's also really silly definitions on it. And as a project for a class, you can actually write in suggestions, and they take a lot of suggestions. So it could be a fun contest or a fun goal, right? To come up with some climate change language. Let's talk a little bit about despair and hope. Not the funnest topic for a lot of people. Again, it's the compost pile that grows a new garden. Peter Chabad wrote a really great book, whether you're a therapist, a psychologist or not, called Despair and the Return of Hope. He talks about the relationship between despair and hope and the skill of the many emotions in between, and how they're essential in our process of digesting trauma and human pain. Unprocessed pain will always feel worse than felt pain. Part of it is to show ourselves we can do it. And we need some confidence in our capacity to hold climate grief right now, because it is really big. Despair and our activation through it wakes us up emotionally and gets us moving. Despair and hope have many other names, but it's a part of most emotional experiences humans have, especially when growth and healing are involved. Panic and fear. Another really great book by Elizabeth Burchard, in her book Parenting in the Changing Climate, expresses the need for understanding what's happening to us emotionally. And primal panic is our collective body's instinctual way to lead us towards safety. And we're not listening to it because we're not connected. Remember earlier when we talked about emotions, and when you ignore them over and over again, they stop working in a way, or at least we override them. So feeling and accepting the panic and the fear we're all feeling in some way helps us stay calmer, actually, and more clear-headed, so we can figure out what to do and how to move forward. She says acceptance is the end of the argument with reality. Once we get there, we feel less crazy and more calm. I didn't include this on here because I didn't know if I would have time. Are we going right up until 6? Okay. But there is a really great writing technique. The one I really like is called the Penn-Baker paradigm. It has 4 different prompts, but essentially what it does is, so you're laying in bed at night. This is what happens when we don't feel the panic or the dread or the primal fear. It catches us off guard. We lie awake in bed, we can't get to sleep, or we're thinking about it when we're supposed to be present with our students or our children or our families, whatever. So research shows the act of journaling is actually really, really wonderful for resolving primal panic and fear and trauma, because it provides, instead of chaotic rumination, which is just like kind of catches us like a tornado does, right? Contained rumination allows us to sort of put our biggest fears in a right size box, so we can kind of open the box and look in at them without feeling completely shut down and offline. So the 4 techniques the 4 prompts are essentially: write for 5 minutes about your worst fears about climate change. Write for 5 more. Now, write about, what if that biggest, most terrible thing didn't happen? Write about that. Then at the end, what a lot of people report is, the 4th prompt is, how do you feel now about the biggest fear? A lot of people report that their anxiety level instantly goes down, that they feel a little bit calmer and clearer because they provided some space to feel what their body is asking them to feel, which is, I'm afraid. There's so much overwhelming uncertainty and things aren't looking great. What does this mean? So to be able to take a moment and just look at it and feel like, okay, it's safe to look at it, is really, really helpful for teachers and students. I sometimes work with organizations on climate change. And recently I was actually working with the Department of Public Safety on some language. So in Minnesota, climate change impacts us very much. In fact, out of the disaster response, extreme heat is the highest, has the highest impact on Minnesotans. Death, injury, like it impacts our communities in really big ways. So a part of this, some of their messaging they wanted some help with was, how can we talk to people about it's okay to feel afraid, you know, it's okay if there's a tornado coming, or if there's this, or, you know, you've had an experience with extreme heat, it's really normal to feel scared. And if you make some space to feel scared, you'll actually feel calmer when it's time to react. So the state is trying to figure out how to talk to us about how to feel a little more comfortable in some of our emotions, because in a disaster or an emergency response, it helps us to be safe and to do the things we need to do, right, without panicking, if we've spent a little time before letting some of those feelings out. This is a fantastic book. I love the last section of this book. Really breaks down a lot of sectors in society: education, medicine, public health, you know, all sorts of areas, and talks about exactly what I said earlier. What if we get it right? Like, what if we adapt? And in some way we've come to a positive resolution as humans. What would that look like? It is so important to dream. Elizabeth Ayanna Johnson wrote the book, What If We Get It Right? Visions of Climate Futures. And she worked with an artist. If you can see this picture, there's a few pictures in the book just about, like, what would society look like? You know, there's no sidewalks, there's no cement, there's no cars. I see fresh produce, I see fruit growing, I see community members outside, I see repurposed and recycled clothing. What would it look like? And how often, you know, are you trying to dream and you're told, oh, that's unreasonable, or we don't have the money to do it, or that's never going to happen? There's something about living in this world and kind of staying so much in our lanes that has really shut off the capacity to dream. And a part of that is our emotional response again, right? Not only, so we usually cut off our emotions because they're painful, and that's what we're taught generationally. But when we lose the hard stuff, we also lose the good stuff. So we lose the capacity to dream. So when I'm talking to people about, okay, what's your dream? What would this world look like if we got it right? And it wasn't a utopia, it wasn't perfect, but it was good. People don't know how to do it. And I also encourage, don't get too frustrated in yourself, because it takes practice. Just like it takes practice understanding and translating your emotions, it takes practice to dream. Another great thing to do with kids: let's dream about what this world could look like. Oh yeah, it's really hard, right? It's hard at first. Okay, let's keep coming back to it. Let's see where we can get in a semester, or let's see, you know, if we do this 5 minutes a week, how might our dreams look from here to here, and how could they change, and how could we get more comfortable with dreaming? Mold curriculum around dreaming. You know, like, what would that look like? And I'm sure many of you are like, I don't know. It'll take some practice. I'm including this. This is actually out of Elizabeth's book, What If We Get It Right? But if anyone wants to use it, please feel free. It is a climate oath. You know, we're used to saying the Pledge of Allegiance, but what if we came up with a different thing to say? On the majesty of tortoise seas and fireflies, on the honor of our parents and our ancestors. I mean, how beautiful is that? Like, how can we come up with different ways to really incorporate this? I have this printed out and on my refrigerator for my kids to see. You know, sometimes at a special meal or a birthday or a holiday, we'll read it together. What if we did that more? What if your students created an oath? You know, what would that be like? I know we're getting close to the end here. I included some, these are really more for adolescents and adults, but I included some fiction and nonfiction books that I think are just a must if you're looking at, you know, kind of sharpening up on what kind of work there is out there on climate change. A lot of these are recovering from an apocalypse, but a lot of them are also, what if we figure this out? What if we get it right? One of my favorites, I just want to mention The Ministry for the Future. If anyone has read that, Kim Stanley Robinson, what he does is he takes a theoretical the next 30 years and like, what if we just by the skin of our teeth figure this out? And he takes a lot of either, you know, practiced actual research that maybe isn't implemented in a big way, but could be, or theoretical models of research for how we can navigate climate adaptation. And it's just a really beautiful, in fact, I was listening to NPR the other day, and they were talking about drilling into icebergs to pump out the water, because the water between the rock and the iceberg is actually what's increasing melt in a way we never imagined. And he talks about it a lot in his book, and I won't give it away, but I just was so heartwarmed to hear like, oh my God, I remember this in the book, and here it is. We're talking about this as an actual possibility for how we might save one of the biggest icebergs on the planet. Let's see, I included a list of references if you want to look further into any of the, oh yeah, and the podcast is actually on there. But I'd love to just save a couple minutes if you have any questions or comments and you feel comfortable sharing. I really appreciate all you being here today, and I've had a really great time with you, talking to you about emotions and climate change.
And if you don't feel comfortable coming off mute and want to put questions in the chat, I am very happy to read them. And thank you, Tessa. We're getting lots of thank yous in the chat. I don't know if you can see it at the moment.
Pleasure. I can't, but that is fine.
Good.
I feel it. I know you're here for a reason. And I know it's hard to talk about this stuff. So I really understand that even kind of coming up with like, what is my question, or how do I want to say this? What if I come off as ignorant, or, you know, I don't want to, you know, not sound right. Don't worry about that. We're going to get there, but there's no pressure. If you'd like to reach out to me, do you have my information on there? You can find me. My website is out there. I have my contact information on it. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, or I'd like to talk more about emotions and climate change and how you might help yourself, your families, your students.
And we, of course, recorded the presentation, so everybody will be getting the recording afterwards. And Tessa, if you feel comfortable, we can send out your information with that too. Great.
No problem at all. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for sharing an hour with me on a Wednesday.